Hi, I am one dodgy dude. Fiction has plenty of odds stacked against it. At the back of their minds, audiences know they're experiencing a construct, a series of events engineered to set off specific emotional and intellectual reactions. The best storytellers, just like great illusionists, know how to camouflage this. They understand that immersion and suspension of disbelief are the perfect means to spellbind an audience. These artists have at their disposal a vast array of tools to bring off a successful illusion. This channel is all about mastering those tools. There are too many to cover in a mere video, so today we'll concentrate on just two, and how Rogue One made a bunch of them. Stories can slack off in several aspects and still come out on top. They shouldn't, but they can. One aspect, however, if misused, can lay bare the artificial nature of any story. I am talking about character believability. The genre makes no difference. If a character doesn't behave like a real human being would, if their personality is not consistent throughout the story, and even worse, if the character is in service to the plot instead of the other way around, then said character is not in a well-made story. Rogue One lets us know early on that plot is more important than realistic character portrayal. Jean and her mother, Lyra, flee from the Imperials while Galen, the father, stays behind, giving the family time to escape. So what does Lyra do? She leaves Jean alone and goes on a suicide mission. Why? It's your job to look after the kid, not foist her off on guerrilla fighters. Galen is not in real danger. The girl could be if left alone, or with the wrong kind of people. And what exactly did she hope to accomplish here? It's one thing if she had at least tried to sneak up on them, or pick them off with a sniper rifle. It's another if she comes jogging across an open field. She's lucky she even made it that far. It's bad enough her behavior makes no sense. It's worse when the strings in the puppeteer's hands make no attempt to hide from the audience. Obviously, the plot needed to turn Jean into a bitter, jaded orphan. Ergo, her mother had to act like an irresponsible dumbass. This is what I mean when I say characters are in service to the plot. When writing them, the storyteller is not asking, would a real person behave this way? And if so, why? He or she is thinking, I need the plot to go one way, so the characters have to accommodate to that. Realism and consistency be damned. Let's go through the character roster. First in the spotlight is Bodhi, aka the pilot, aka a walking plot device. Want the challenge? Write a paragraph of what drives Bodhi as a person. Give me something deep and compelling. If that's not hard enough, try to explain his character without using terms like fast talking or anxious. You'll have a hard time because the character is pure fluff. His purpose in the first half of the movie is to illustrate how far off the deep end Saw Gerrera has gone. And I wonder why, because Saw Gerrera dies before the midpoint, so he's not that important. In the movie's second half, Bodhi is just another gear in the machinery that puts the Death Star plans in the rebellion's hands. On the flight to Edu, Bodhi lets on that part of the reason why he agreed to smuggle out Galen's message is that he wants to get right by himself. And that's it. That's the extent of his backstory. Which crossroads compelled him to defect from the Empire? What specific event made him risk his life for other people? What made him go on a suicide mission? Is he an idealist? He never expresses it. Does he hold a grudge against the Empire? Did he do terrible things in their service? Is there anything at all to convince us that yes, this fictional creation could pass off as a real human being? It's one thing when you're the comic relief, like K2. He's good for getting chuckles out of the audience, but he himself has no real goals other than to assist the main characters with their mission. Of course, K2 gets away with this because he's a machine, and he's programmed to do what he's told. The bright side is that Bodhi takes the initiative. He's an active character. He risks his life to get the job done. But when crafting somebody so driven and brave, the story should provide a more compelling and emotional reason than the plot needed him to be this way. Next character on the list is Chirrut Imwe, aka the Jedi who isn't really a Jedi. To call him a plot device is not enough. He's a breathing deus ex machina. Don't you ever wonder why these seemingly wise, strong-willed old men don't do anything useful in the movies until the heroes turn up? Hold that thought because I'll come back to it in the second chapter of this video. For the time being, suffice to say Chirrut has no goal of his own except to tag along with the main characters and play his part in the final sequence. He has no discernible ambitions or desires, other than to be cryptic in his wisdom, or nearly sanctimonious depending on the scene. He doesn't develop a close relationship with anyone else in the party, which only reinforces my perception of him as a plot device. And his friend, Machine Gun Guy, well, he's like Chirrut but even more shallow. All the weight falls on the protagonist's shoulders. The good news is that Cassian Andor has the clear goal of fighting for the rebellion, plus the dedication that shows this is no token affinity. He believes in what he's doing. The bad news is in the way the writers handle his alleged inner crisis. Here's Cassian Andor at a secret meeting with an informant. In order to make a clean getaway, he has to kill the informant in cold blood. So our first impression is that he's ruthless and calculating. Not necessarily cruel, but driven enough that he will fulfill his mission at all costs. His lingering stare hints that he may feel some remorse. So the stage is set for a character who does terrible things for a good cause, and whose feelings may reach a boiling point. That point occurs when Cassian has to decide whether to pull the trigger on Galen Erso. This is the moment in his character arc which feels the most artificial. I understand intellectually what the movie is going for, but I don't understand it emotionally. The best way for somebody to break out of habitual behavior, like killing in cold blood, is for something or somebody highly unusual to have an influence on that person's life. Take Han Solo. He was self-interested and mercenary in A New Hope, until he crossed paths with idealistic fighters who put their money where their mouth was. Not only that, they called Han out on his selfishness, made him square up to the conflict inside him. That's why Cassian's decision not to shoot Galen feels empty and out of the blue. What made him hold back? What made this moment so special? It can't be Jyn, because their relationship so far has been purely practical. They haven't bonded that much. Chirrut says something to him about people carrying their own prisons. But fortune cookie wisdom doesn't carry a lot of emotional weight. It's not as specific or forceful enough to be considered a confrontation. The moral turning point of a character is the worst moment for the intrusive hand of the writer to show through. The main reason being that it casts doubt on everything about the character. Maybe the hints of death we caught sight of earlier were all a sham. Just another example of plot coming ahead of character. Now we arrive at our main character, Jyn Erso. Her problem is quite clear. She has no goals, hardly any personality, and a painfully vague backstory. All of which results in a shallow character that feels by the numbers. The first time we see adult Jyn in action confuses me. Rebel commandos rescue her from an Imperial labor camp. They say her do nothing threatening, but Jyn attacks them and rushes off. I see two possibilities. The scene was built this way to give K2 a memorable intro, in which case it would be another example of plot being more important than character believability. Or there's bad blood between Jyn and the rebels that is not fully explained in the movie, but might make sense if I read a tie-in novel or comic book. It's hard to get behind Jyn because at the start, she seems to have no bigger aspirations than to stay alive. If it wasn't for the prologue, I'd be wondering who the more important character is, Cassian or Jyn. Her past is also in a haze. She tells Saw Gerrera that the cause brought her only pain, but her words ring hollow, because we the audience haven't experienced that pain with her. So far she's seen more indifferent than pained. And I know, we could make the argument that's the mask she wears to protect herself from further pain. It's a valid psychological explanation. But no real drama comes out of it. Saw and Jyn have something of a heated conversation about this, but the bulk of their relationship happened off screen, so the emotional stakes here are not strong. Her supposedly troubled past has almost no effect on the story. There was potential though. Reimagine the scene where Jyn watches her father's hologram. How about if Galen, instead of talking about himself 90% of the time, devoted most of his monologue to Jyn? He could say how she was always a happy-go-lucky child, and that no matter how bad things got, she always found the bright side. She always cared about others. That kind of thing. Then you'd contrast this with Jin facing up to the fact she's isolated from other people, indifferent to idealism, and could become irretrievably broken if she doesn't change her ways. Instead of being a scene primarily about Galen communicating the weakness of the Death Star, plus some half-baked attempt at rousing emotion, it could be a scene that stokes emotions first and moves the plot along second. And credit what credit's due, I do think Felicity Jones emoted wonderfully in the scene, more than the script deserved it for sure. In the movie's second half, Jin does have a clearer sense of identity and a goal. But then we run into a new set of problems. See, in the first half, Jin is a blank canvas. She doesn't say much, we know even less about her. As soon as she starts talking passionately after leaving Iru, we realize she's not the sharpest tool in the shed. Here she upbraids Castian for lying to her. And she has the right to do it, of course. It gets a bit nonsensical when he points out that he had the chance to pull the trigger on her father, but he didn't. That he disobeyed the order to kill Galen. She retorts with, "Those are bad orders and you are no better than a stormtrooper." Except he disobeyed those orders, so he is better than a stormtrooper. Okay, maybe she's still emotional from her father's death, maybe she can't think straight. Well, that theory goes out the window in the scene with the Alliance's leaders. The higher-ups don't want to order a mission to Scarif, it's too risky. After a rocky start, she begins to win them over. Then she bungles it up by saying they should deploy the entire rebel fleet to Scarif if they have to. They just said they're afraid Jin's father lied in order to lure the rebel fleet to Scarif and have it destroyed. So she tells them to send the rebel fleet anyway. What she should have done, what anybody with a brain should have done, was stick to the idea of sending a small team of commandos to retrieve the information. Be practical and emphatic. Don't just spout second-rate platitudes. I could accept Jin's ineptitude if she had been established as somebody who's socially awkward or poor with words. For that to have happened, there should have been real character development in the first 2 acts of the movie. As things stand, I think the plot needed Jin to be stupid, so the main characters would have to go off on their own and come across as brave underdogs. So even when Jin does get more character, she's still in bondage to the plot. Rogue One shackled its characters to the plot, and this pervaded the movie with a sense of artificiality that made it hard to convey believable emotions. Many of you might counter my points by saying that you did feel for the characters throughout the movie, maybe even all of them. But think on this. How many of those feelings originated from the movie, and how many from yourself? Let's make things clear. A story is supposed to trigger emotions, and every member of the audience will have a distinct reaction. But when that person has a stronger emotional reaction than the story calls for, the credit goes to that individual, not the story. A good storyteller doesn't let the audience do the emotional heavy lifting all by itself. Picture the last scene with Jin and her father. So far in the plot, the father-daughter relationship has been given only the most cursory attention. They were together for a handful of seconds in the prologue and in a dream. The hologram scene is an exposition dump masquerading as a dramatic moment. The sense of connection between them is too superficial to spark intense emotions. However, it is developed enough to trigger emotions in the viewer. If you're really close to your father and maybe even happen to have lost him, this scene might drive intense emotions out of you. In that case, it's the viewer supplying the intense emotion, not the story. All the movie does is provide a trigger for said emotion. Put differently, what's the point of going to a restaurant that provides only the location and expects you to do all the cooking and serving? You might as well stay home. And so Rogue One makes a complete hash of the delicate art of crafting characters and communicating intense emotions. That is quite the blunder, but I believe the movie's second flaw is even more insidious. I'll let you be the judge of it. When I first heard the premise of Rogue One, I surmised the movie would play like a heist movie. Think of Ocean's 11 or Now You See Me. Assemble a team of crackerjacks, pit them against insurmountable obstacles, and see how their unique skills make the impossible seem possible. In that kind of setup, you don't need well-developed characters because the spectacle, the twist, and seeing how a group of problem solvers tackle an extremely difficult challenge are all that the genre is supposed to deliver. Rogue One chose a different path. Judging purely by public reaction and critical appraisal, Rogue One is a war film set in the Star Wars universe. A gritty, more realistic take on the battle between rebels and the Empire, a dark, intense tale of sacrifice. But that angle is far too idealized. I agree to an extent that this is a story of self-sacrifice. Selflessness can be a strong virtue, and giving one's life for the greater good can be the apex of righteousness. It can be. It isn't always, but that's a topic for another time. When real people risk their lives to save others, it's a wonderful thing that should be celebrated. The key words in that sentence are real people. Writers have to work overtime to make self-sacrificing fictional people appear convincing, because astute viewers are aware they're being tricked into caring for somebody who doesn't even exist. The better writers operate under the assumption that their audiences are skeptical and demanding, so a lot more effort has to go into whittling down their defenses and compelling them to feel something for a fictional person. As I said in Chapter 1, these characters are a far cry from credible human beings. I mean, what do they sacrifice at the end? Their lives? They don't have lives. They don't seem to have family or loved ones or dreams and aspirations. Why should the fact they're giving up their lives affect me in a meaningful way? They are the perfect people to go on a suicide mission because they have nothing to lose. As things stand, there's no room for catharsis. I also take issue with the idea that Rogue One is a gritty war story, or the darkest installment in the saga so far. It's not on either count. It's a typical Star Wars movie except it has a grayer palette. If it's a war movie, it's a watered down version of Saving Private Ryan. If Rogue One wanted the cachet of a grim war film, or being more realistic about war than the average Star Wars movie, then why is it so morally tame? Think on the battle in the streets of Jeddah. Jyn sees a little girl crying, left behind in the middle of a shootout. So of course, she rushes to the rescue. Easy and cliché. Want to live up to the idea of a gritty, ambiguous war movie? Why not have a stormtrooper rush to save the little girl? He wants to get her out of harm's way, so he grabs her and hands her over to the girl's mother. Right after, he's shot by one of the partisans, or maybe even Cassian, who could say something cold and in character like, he's still the enemy. And build on that. Maybe his unfair death has an impact on Jyn and her character development. In the real version, her rescuing the little girl makes little difference to the plot, and has no visible impact on Jyn as a person. It can generate an emotion, but not the strongest kind. The thing is, the kind of moral complexity attached to truly great war films, like All Quiet on the Western Front, The Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now, just to name a few, doesn't gel with the overall tone of Star Wars. Probably the most complex story told in the Star Wars universe is in the game Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords. And even that one had to go back thousands of years prior to the original trilogy for its different tone to be less jarring. Rogue One used the same old Star Wars template of underdogs set against seemingly impossible odds. Nothing revolutionary there, but it still manages to screw it up. If you've been watching the Star Wars movies for a long time, there's a fair chance you might sympathize with the term I'm about to invent: underdog fatigue. Here's what I mean. It's okay for one movie to portray stormtroopers as incompetent and terrible shots. Depending on the tone, it might even be necessary. A second movie? Still okay, I guess. Third movie? It's getting a bit old. Fourth movie? Again, really? Fifth movie? Damn, change it up already! Okay, that's a simplified way of saying the plot armor of the main characters grows more and more evident with each movie, and it kills the potential for actual drama and danger. So now that I've broached this topic, what better time to go back to the character of Chirrut Îmwe? Bad enough that he is the embodiment of a deus ex machina, it's even more terrible that he represents a worrisome trend. Namely, that the filmmakers in charge of these new Star Wars movies don't care how overpowered their supposed underdogs are. This proved a terrible flaw in The Force Awakens, and it also took root in Rogue One. He's not a Jedi, they tell us, yet he acts like one, thereby saving the main characters from the frying pan. He's blind, yet he has the easiest of times shooting a weapon at a ship and hitting it dead center. And how fortunate that his staff doubles as a blaster strong enough to blow up an aircraft. And am I supposed to be moved by this scene? Anybody really thinks he's going to die before he pushes that lever? Oh, and newsflash, the Force isn't with you. The writers and their plot armor are with you. They're not even trying to hide themselves anymore, if they ever try. The Battle of Scarif suffers from Underdog fatigue as well. Consider how they infiltrate Scarif. This is modeled on a similar plot point from Return of the Jedi. Only in that movie, it made sense for the heroes to be allowed access to the planet, because the Emperor had set them a trap. In Rogue One, they bring up the danger of being turned away at the door, but nothing comes out of that. Our heroes don't have to find a way to overcome that obstacle. So why shine the spotlight on a potential problem if you're not going to live up to it? Take the Imperial Walkers. Ever since The Empire Strikes Back, these mechanical giants have been imposing enemies. They require utmost ingenuity and boldness to bring them down. In Rogue One, a rocket to the head, a couple of X-Wing blasts, and down they go. What the hell? Why feature one of the most badass weapons of destruction if you're going to dispose of them so easily? The Star Destroyers lost some of their mystique after Return of the Jedi, when a single A-Wing somehow brought down the Executor. Even so, it still felt like a cheat when 3 Y-Wings disabled an entire destroyer with a few shots. Why are the Alliance leaders afraid of fighting? Set loose an entire squadron of Y-Wings armed with ion cannons. They'll make short work of the Imperial fleet. I am not even going to touch this. I mean, the rebels can do whatever the hell they want, that's pretty obvious. What's the point of labeling them the underdogs if they're going to kick this much ass so easily? And so we arrive at the second reason why Rogue One is fundamentally flawed. It says and does nothing that the original trilogy didn't say with greater eloquence and finesse. Underdog stories in Star Wars are not going to flourish anymore. The bad guys lost any credibility as dangerous foes a long time ago. The patina of a gritty war movie is just a sham. A great makeup job meant to hide just how stale the formula is becoming, and how emotionally shallow this story is. I never thought I'd say Star Wars would become like The Simpsons, but it seems to be headed that way. The Simpsons lost much of its identity and bite when much of the original creative staff left the show. The new blood didn't seem to understand what made The Simpsons so special, so they settled for a superficial imitation which eventually degenerated into self-parody. It's the same with Star Wars. The new guys working on the Star Wars movies, even when they collaborate with elements of the old guard, don't seem to understand the intricacies that made the old Star Wars so great. They apparently believe that as long as you feature X-Wings, Stormtroopers, and the Force, you can have a Star Wars movie. It makes me sad because Star Wars used to be about much more than space battles and laser shootouts. After the smash success of The Force Awakens and Rogue One, I'm beginning to believe the new generation of filmmakers and even the audience don't understand the essence and the mechanics that made the original films so great. For most of my Star Wars videos, I've taken on a critical tone. It's time to switch gears, because for my next project, I'm going to examine the first Star Wars movie, the lightning-in-a-bottle masterpiece that set off a phenomenon that continues to this day. We'll study the storytelling tools, whether intentionally or accidentally used, that transform what could have been a Saturday matinee pastiche into one of the biggest cultural phenomena of the 20th century. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to watch a longer story analysis of this movie, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and follow me on Facebook and Twitter to make extra sure you don't miss any of my videos. If you are able to support the channel on Patreon to help keep the lights on, that would be most welcome. Have a wonderful day, and go write a great story.